I'm going to talk to Rachel Doran, the Executive Director at Clean Energy Canada, about a new survey they've done about five clean tech adopter groups in Canada and how, is there enough demand? Yes, there is, as it turns out. Is there enough support from policy and other places? No. Welcome to the interview, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me, Markham.
Give me an overview of this study and why Clean Energy Canada undertook it, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I think when we started thinking about the issue of like the adoption of clean technology, so by that I mean not only EVs that are tend to electric vehicles, which tend to be the best known, but heat pumps for homes, electric hot water heaters, even something as simple as a smart thermostat. And I think when we commonly conceive of who's adopting this, we start thinking of either, it's like this is someone who's super motivated. It doesn't matter how complicated the government program is. They're going to become their own expert. They're going to research everything. They'll have all the apps. Or the opposite problem of like the person for whom this might not make sense. So the like outlier case of someone who does drive 400 kilometers through, very rural Canada as part of their daily commute and might have reasonable concerns about charging. What we wanted to get at is like, who are the next adopters of these technologies? How many people out there say they're interested, but something's standing in their way or they just haven't done it yet? And what is it that actually is the barrier for those people? So, through this study, what we tried to do is really develop in a study of both the Greater Toronto area and the Greater Vancouver area. What are the attitudes in these like biggest suburban metropolises in English-speaking Canada? And how do we start breaking down a little bit? It's always an oversimplification, but what are some of the groupings of people who feel alike around these topics? And can we learn something about how to communicate with them and what they need that can help orient government policies and how we address this?
I want to overlay a little bit of technology adoption theory onto this because there's a very famous work that was started 60 years ago in the US by a fellow named A.E. Rogers, early technology adoption theory. And he has the famous bell curve, where on the left-hand side you have the innovators and then the early adopters and the early majority adopters, and you go up the bell curve. And I've always found that very useful when explaining how why we don't just flick a switch and everybody adopts the technology at once, because people feel differently about it. They have, we're not, my wife and I are not early adopters. We're closer up to the middle because, we journalists don't get paid a whole lot of money and we got to be careful, make our pennies count. Does, does that bell curve approach make sense given the five categories that you uncovered in your survey?
I think so. So we've had an active debate about, does this apply every time? Is it universal? But I think what you're describing is probably the lived experience of many people. It's like somebody on your street gets an electric vehicle. They were the one who adopted back in 2018 when the range wasn't as good. They were willing to go out and explore the 10 apps that used to exist before everything was on Google Maps. And so those people were very motivated for their own reasons and are often what you're describing as those early adopters. And what we're getting to now, I think, in something like electric vehicles is, maybe the people who bought it a couple of years ago were sort of operating under different motivations than someone who might be looking today, who's like, well, no, I need to know it's practical. I don't want to have to deal with complexity. And, the price has to be at X point. I'm interested, but I want all of those criteria to be met. And I want someone else to have tried it to make sure it's going to work first. So I think for something like an electric vehicle, we have tried it. We know it works. 1 in 4 vehicles sold globally this year is going to be electric. So, it's really around how are we addressing some of those concerns, which we found to be both founded in fact, like how are we addressing through policies, like the real problems, but some of them are also perceptions that maybe people who are less aware of a technology might still have. And some people who are just aren't interested really at all, and they'll probably be what you're describing as those late adopters in the curve. We really have to get 2/3 of people behind the wheel of an electric vehicle before it's going to start making sense for them. So how do we map out a little bit who these people all are?
One of the differences between, fossil fuel technologies and clean tech is that clean tech tends to be a higher upfront cost. So your purchase price is higher, but your operating costs are much lower. And I'll use the example of our home where, we bought a heat pump 3 years ago And we took advantage of some of the federal programs, provincial programs. And so it came in probably about $3,000 more than a gas furnace and a traditional air conditioner. But my goodness, I was utterly shocked at how little electricity it uses to heat and cool our home. And not only that, our home is more comfortable, and there are all kinds of other benefits to it. So the this idea, this is what I'm getting at, is if that the idea we don't buy things on total cost of ownership. We buy them on the purchase price. And so do we educate people that, maybe we can shift consumer attitudes towards considering total cost of ownership, or do we subsidize the purchase price of this technology and make it easier for them to buy, lower that barrier? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, we need to meet people where they're at, I guess, is my main answer to your question. And I do think, again, I'm going to keep referring to EVs because I think on the spectrum of clean technologies in Canada, EVs have hit this place where people tend to have an opinion about them. They've heard about them. Many people know someone, who has an electric vehicle, whereas something like rooftop solar is like, a little more niche, or you may not have heard your neighbor talking about electric hot water heater. So I keep using this as a bit of an example, but I guess I would say, yeah, in our polling, it's true now that the majority of people know for a fact that they're going to save money over time driving an electric vehicle. And we've done numerous studies on that. Total cost of ownership over 10 years, because electricity is so much cheaper than gas, you're going to save money. The challenge, I think, is that people still, as you say, are saying, well, I'm still not willing to pay more upfront. And so I need the price point to be X. In our polling, we found people are equally willing. They want to spend the same amount of money on an electric car as they want to spend on a gas powered car, even though they know they're going to save money over time. So to help people get behind the wheel, we need policies, programs, or just like the consumer price point to start ending up closer to that. We found about half of people thought that's around the $40,000 price point that you could get, them interested and feel like that was within their budget. So to answer your question directly, I think there are creative ways that you can help not have people have to deal with the upfront costs. So like the federal government's Greener Homes loan means you can spend your money over time. You're not paying interest. But, what really gets at people the best and what they're most interested in is something that would help them not have to deal with that upfront cost at all. And maybe that'll change over time as we start thinking of stuff like my energy wallet. It's like, well, it doesn't matter whether I'm paying my car loan or whether I'm paying, gas prices or electricity prices. It's all money coming out of my paycheck. And so if I'm paying more on the car loan and less on the electricity, maybe it still comes out better for me month by month. But I think that's an idea that it's still going to take a little while for people to wrap their minds around.
One of the points, and I didn't see this in your report, maybe I missed it, but it's the how simple it is to electrify your home. And this is again, a bit of a shocker for me. So we had the usual, the electric fridge and the electric stove and the microwave. That was fine. But then we added the heat pump. Whoa, that was a revelation. Wow, this is good stuff. Next thing that came along, the gas water heater went, so it had to be replaced. Well, the capital cost for the electric versus gas was the same. And as it turned out, the operating cost was the same. Though that was the advice we received. I found that the actual cost, I think, is a little lower. We have electric bikes now. We have electric lawnmower. We have electric leaf blower. Everything is, and it was so easy. There was no, maybe it was a little more expensive, but it wasn't that more expensive, and it's quieter, and there's other benefits to it. And I think the ease of shifting into an electric lifestyle around your home is we don't pay enough attention to that. It's just better technology.
Yeah, I think, when we were talking about these things 5 years ago, we thought that, you had to pitch people on the environmental benefits. And that's kind of how we would think of these things. The fact of the matter is, like, electricity is just more efficient. We've gotten used to this idea that you are burning something to generate movement, to generate electricity. Like it's inefficient to be doing that. And so there's a reason based on cost and pure efficiency why so many different things across the global marketplace and products in people's homes are being electrified. As you say, like a heat pump, it's not blowing hot air at you. It's just like a gentle, and more comfortable way of heating and cooling your home. Electric vehicle, charge, you're off your 0 to 60 off the block like nobody's business here. So I think, again, part of what you're saying is actually proven out by studies that show one technology can be a gateway to others once you have that comfort with electrification and kind of see, I'm not suffering because of my choice. I'm actually benefiting because of my choice. It might make you more inclined to then, look at some of the other technologies and ways you can electrify your home. And, I think another thing which we just touched on in this report, but is really exciting and on the horizon, is also like an electric home is very, very flexible. And we're going to be seeing technologies like your car battery plugged in at night can help. We already know you can charge that at really off hour times for really inexpensive amounts of money because electricity is just cheaper then, but we'll see car batteries feeding back into the house, and we'll see your rooftop solar paired with your battery in the basement and your smart thermostat all functioning with everyone in your neighborhood as a virtual power plant that allows us not to have to build a natural gas power plant. So that starts getting a little wonky, but I think it is an exciting vision of the future that you're describing. Like it's, as people adopt these technologies, we're going to be able to do new and interesting things with them too, which at the end of the day is going to save people money.
Agree. Now, this conversation about new technologies and all the advantages and so on, it's been very interesting. But your survey uncovered 5 categories of adopter. Maybe you could run through them for us.
Yeah, and before I say this, I would say off the start, any simplification is an oversimplification. So if you feel yourself not represented here, don't worry. This is for, efforts to try to get at how do we solve people's problems. But let me tell you who our 5 are. And let me start by just saying there was a lot of interest in clean technologies. Like on average, people had 59% of the people that we polled were inclined towards clean technologies. And some of the more almost obscure ones, like the rooftop solar or the smart thermostat, people were really interested in those, up in the 70 percentages. And we divided our polling into sort of 5 segmented groups based on something called latent class analysis, where we figure out what's sort of the commonalities between these groups. And 4 out of those 5 groups were all inclined towards clean technologies. Really, only one was at the end of that bell curve that you were describing at the beginning. So up here in front, I'm going to kind of draw the curve as we're talking here. Up here in front, we have our first group, these early adopters, these very motivated people. We called them a group of net zero dads and moms. One of the things that really brought them together, they tended, and there's disproportionately more urban, lots of families, people with kids under the age of 18, but also just like wanted to lower their carbon footprint, were open to all these different technologies. Like these are the people who are, going to be out there doing the research and trying to kind of adopt these things. And maybe, while they do have barriers, they also cited things like upfront cost or maybe not knowing enough about a technology to be able to make the leap today. They definitely had that motivation. The second group, the kind of main characteristic of this group was age, and we're calling them Generation Green. This was like a younger demographic of people, often living in apartments or condos, very rarely owning their own home. Some parents, but lots of people who are not parents. And one interesting thing is just as you watch these demographic waves, these are people who grew up, already knowing maybe about electric vehicles, who've maybe never owned a fossil fuel powered car, and they were very motivated. But that means there's different challenges for them. Things like, well, I don't have control in my apartment building about what kind of heat is coming in, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to plug my electric vehicle into my condo unit. So then kind of the opposite scale, our third group was the retired homeowners. So these tended to be people who did own a home, who probably had children disproportionately, but who might be out of the home, who were older. And because they own a home, they know a lot about renovations. Like they're ready there to know about how to upgrade their electrical panel, but maybe have a bit more hesitancy around technologies and some of the things they might worry about, whether the technology will perform or be cost effective. The fourth category, also still in this interested group, were practical families. So these were often disproportionately more suburban, more interested in like the true efficacy of these technologies. So are they cost effective? Will they serve the purposes of my family? And I need to kind of see all of that before I'm willing to jump on board. And then finally, the only group who really kind of showed a real reluctance to adoption, it was less that they had a specific barrier they were citing and more just a lack of interest, or they didn't see themselves yet behind these technologies, was a group we were calling the Frugal Skeptics. And again, I think it would really take a lot of cost comparative changes to make sure the technologies made sense for them. And, they had concerns that were a bit more far reaching about whether these technologies would serve their everyday purposes.
Rachel, a lot of the Clean Energy Canada's work is aimed at policymakers, helping, giving them information that they can use when they're, considering regulations or new policies. What's been the response by government so far to the study?
Well, I think we've almost called this less a report or a study and more of an era in Clean Energy Canada. For us, this is now orienting so much of the way that we do our work and so much of how we recommend things to the government. So just again, for that example of, we found in this research the number of people who are interested in an electric vehicle and the price point they're interested in it at. And, our advice to government now is, don't get married to one policy or one approach. There's lots of things you can do, but what you need to do is make sure there are electric vehicles available under a $40,000 price point through a combination of either your tariff and trade policy, your electric vehicle sales standard, your rebate policy, your, et cetera, et cetera. But like that's the goal. So I think we've been rolling out a little bit of that kind of approach and theory for the past several months. And I think it really does resonate with people. It's like we're actually, if you were a business, you're trying to think about your consumers and your customers and you're doing market research. This is the market research for governments who do want to act on these things. And I think we'll be doing, just as a pitch, if anyone wants to hear even more on this topic, we'll be doing a webinar on September 24th, working with folks like Plug and Drive, and a fellow named Drew Tozer, who wrote a report on like how do you get people into heat pumps and what are their real concerns. But yeah, it's all about how do you make this stuff start from the consumer and work upwards to policy rather than starting from policy and working downwards. So I think we're getting some enthusiasm about how can you think in this way and what do people, aside from the news headlines that might lead you to believe people aren't interested, these people are interested. What can we do about it?
Rachel, the talk about this policy is a segue into my last question. And this is an editorial position that Energy Media has taken because we've looked around at other jurisdictions outside of Canada. China would be one, European countries would be another one, and even the US under Joe Biden, where they did both policy around the supply side where and the demand side. So in the demand side, you're deploying EVs and heat pumps and so on. On the supply side, you're manufacturing them. And the idea, of course, is that you want to manufacture as much as you can at home, and you want those supply chains at home. That was very much an explicit part of Biden's strategy. We're not a big country. We're only 40 million people. I get it. We can't always, maybe we can't have our own EV manufacturing company. Maybe we can, whatever. But the point here is that if you're going to subsidize the purchase of technology by Canadians, what do you think of the idea of pairing it with an industrial policy so that to the extent possible, we can manufacture that technology at home?
So, I mean, I think even just today, we saw the Prime Minister announce a first tranche of nation building projects. And I think we've been very focused on this idea of how do you cut a ribbon on a big project. But, where I definitely agree with you is like nation building is about smart industrial policy. It's about making sure we are able to buy Canadian, that we are producing some of these things at home, because inevitably the support for some of this, it's great to get a heat pump, but wouldn't it be even better if you were supporting, a business and workers in your own community? So 100%. I do think we're starting realistically from a place where we don't have all the supply chains anchored in Canada. It will be, an effort to figure out where can we compete. Is our goal simply to be providing for Canada? Are we trying to choose places where we could have comparative advantage internationally and be exporting some of these things? We're obviously in an upended global trade environment right now. So all these questions are on the table. But I will say, it was assessed just last year that, there's going to be over 2 trillion US dollars set to be invested in just the top clean energy technologies by 2035. If Canada isn't thinking about how to produce some of these things, we're really missing an opportunity. And so, and of course, like everyone in Canada these days is laser focused on how do we support producers at home? How do we, support ourselves and break down trade barriers, build up supply chains domestically? So I think you raise a really good point, and we've always made the clear that, having policies that spur demand can also help anchor investments here. We're not as big of a market as the US, but we're the ninth largest economy globally. Like if we start buying things, that does matter. So, I think that we're in a new era of policy where we need to start thinking about how some of these traditional tools can be like repackaged or put together to help achieve goals like what I was previously describing, which is how are you using some of these things to drive down the price of a particular product? And what you've raised, which is how are we using some of these things in government investments to leverage domestic production or support existing domestic producers?
Yes, that's exactly where we're going with this. And I'm kind of curious. This will be my last question, I promise. But I'm kind of curious because you talk to so many policymakers, people inside government, elected officials. What do they think of this? What's their response? Is it just, oh yeah, we should put these programs in place so we can lower emissions and maybe we'll hit our climate target because that's an important thing? Or are they open to the idea of thinking strategically where, oh, if we spend money over here, maybe we can also stimulate some investment and create jobs over on the other side of the ledger?
I mean, I would say certainly a lot of things are happening very fast in government these days. So there's the risk that maybe something happens in terms of a decision and there isn't just the opportunity to think of it as a package or a negotiating lever. Like what do you, if you are investing on the production side, what are you looking for companies to do, in the marketplace, or vice versa? If you're supporting consumers, can you also help them be buying domestic? And if you asked that question a couple of years ago, there would have been all kinds of global trade rules that would have stood in our way. But, we're in a new era. And so, I think there's definitely the drive at the level of government. One thing I would just caution is because we don't, if you look across Canada, I think maybe we have one heat pump producer today. I haven't mapped it. We don't have a comprehensive map of exactly the clean electricity supply chain. Like what's Canada producing on transformers this is outside of the household spectrum, but like we haven't mapped all of this stuff and we haven't had full supply chains in Canada. We've had them across North America. So we're in a new era. And I think we need to just recognize that there probably is going to be a transition period. We can build up some of this capacity and some of these pieces, but it will take time. And so also, how are we spurring demand in the meantime? So, we've been on the record saying we think maybe there's some room in a broader package to think about a flexibility on trade policy for something like electric vehicles. That's definitely not trying to displace domestic production, but we're not producing that many like full off the line EVs here today in Canada. And those that we have are maybe not priced, again, from this study in the way that Canadians might want them to be. So how are we using competition to spark, domestic innovation and more things happening in Canada while having that other extremely worthwhile goal of helping build up our own economy so we can be shipping all these things off in the economy of the future.
Well, Rachel, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.